This is Paul with Electric Scooter Guide, and I'm going to take you through a quick brake cable and caliper adjustment for an M365 by Xiaomi. The first thing to check with your brakes if you're having trouble is check your brake cable tension, especially if the scooter's new. That's usually all you're going to need to do. And so the first place to look is, does your brake lever come all the way back to the handlebar without skidding the rear tire? This one certainly does, and so it needs an adjustment. So we'll come back here and check, and you want to make sure that your rear wheel is spinning freely. If it's not, then you just don't even go for the cable adjustment. You're going to need to do a full caliper adjustment. But this one's spinning freely, so let's give it a shot. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to unlock the lock nut here. We're going to use an 8mm, this is a combo wrench, open end, box end, and we're going to unlock the lock nut, and then we're going to take the lock nut, spin it all the way up against the adjuster, which is up here, and then we're going to take the adjuster and spin it all the way down. What we're doing is we're giving ourselves some room to tighten up the brakes later if we need to. So I'll take it all the way down, and then I like to take it back up by about half a turn to one turn. I'm going to go one turn here. All right, now we can set the brake cable tension. First thing we're going to do is unlock the cable keeper here, and then we can push this up, not quite all the way up where it touches, and then back it off just a little bit, and then lock it down, and then go ahead and check your cable tension at the other end. And then I can also adjust more right here if I need to make a fine adjustment. And so if your cable tension feels good, and if your rear brake light's lighting up, then you're good. If you set it too tight, it can feel good, and then if you can set it so tight that it won't trigger the brake light before you're locking the rear wheel. And if that's the case, you want to give it a little more slack, because not only does it need a certain amount of movement to light up your brake light, but that also controls your regenerative front brake. So it's important also not to have your brakes set too tight. So now, if you have drag and you don't have the right amount of tension, now it's time to go for a full caliper adjustment, and that's what we're going to do next. So to do this, we're going to start out by just getting the pads out of the way. So I'm going to completely release the tension here. To release the tension on the inner pad, you have to undo this grub screw right here. And it's this guy right down here. It's hard to see, but it's down in this hole. And for this, you're going to use a 2mm Allen wrench. And you're just going to put it in here. And you're going to give it one full turn to the left. And that unlocks the rear pad so it can now be adjusted. And then we're going to use our 5mm Allen and go through here. I don't know if you can see it. And this goes right into the adjuster for the rear pad, and lets us dial in how close that rear pad sits to the rotor. This is important because these mechanical calipers, almost all of them, they only push the outside pad towards the rotor. For the backside pad, it's important that you just have it setting as close as you can get it to the rotor without touching it. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this in a bit. Now it's dragging, and so I'm going to go ahead and back it out. And in fact, right now, we're just going to back it out all the way, because before we get to this step, we need to set the caliper so it's lined up with the rotor. And to do that, we're going to have a look down here, and you can see that the caliper has this nice little gap in the middle, and the rotor is right through the middle there. And in this case, it's a little bit closer to this edge than to this edge. And the way we're going to adjust that is by using our 4mm Allen and loosening these two mounting bolts about one turn, or just enough to where you can move them. You don't want them super floppy loose. And now you can see we can move this around quite a bit. And you want to have it centered when you look at it from the rear. You want to have it centered when you look at it from the front, and that way the pads are going to be parallel to the rotor, and they're going to grip the rotor evenly and give you good braking. And so I'm going to set the camera down and set this so that we are centered back here and centered up at the front, and then we'll be able to start adjusting. Just going to put a little tension to hold this back, and gonna check the front. Pivot that. Center that up. Okay, that looks good. And then checking the back again, that looks good too. I like using these T-handles because you can just really, it's the easiest to snug it down without pulling the caliper one way or the other, because you're applying torque kind of evenly. And so once I get it snug that way, I'll go ahead and tighten it the rest of the way. Just like that. There. And our caliper is aligned. The rotor is going right up the middle of the caliper. Now we can start adjusting pads. So we've already loosened this grub screw here that prevents the rear adjuster from moving. And so I can go straight to adjusting that rear pad. I can dial it in until I hear it scraping. Just do a little bit of time. You don't want to push too hard on the rotor. Okay, so now it's dragging just a little bit. I'm going to back it off a quarter turn. No drag at all. Turn it back in 1/8 of a turn. Just touching. And in fact, you know what? I'm getting several spins out of this. That's not enough to cause any drag. So we're going to leave it there where it's just contacting a little bit. If you want to, sometimes you have a rotor that's really bent and it's getting, it's really catching in one spot. And kind of a fun way to diagnose that is you can take a magic marker and you can draw a line around the rotor like this, and then I'm rubbing on the table right now, and then you can spin it, and that line will start to rub off in the place where the rotor is bent and rubbing, and then you can take an adjustable wrench, like say this side was rubbing clean right here. That means that the rotor is leaning too far this way. You can take an adjustable wrench and size it right up to the rotor and give the rotor a little nudge back that way to straighten it out. It's kind of an advanced maneuver. I don't recommend you do it unless your rotor is really pretty bent and you're really pretty sure you're bending in the right place. And same thing for the other side. It's a little harder to mark back there. You might have to take the rotor off and mark it. And then you could look through this side and see where it's rubbing and then make that little adjustment if you need to. Or really, sometimes you can just pull it with your hand. But anyway, no matter how you do it, you want to make sure you're identifying where you want to bend it and just make little bends, because you bend it too much, now you need to get yourself a new rotor. So anyway, so hopefully your rotor's not bent, and then you can just set that rear pad like we did. You don't want to forget to lock that down when you're done. And so anytime you make that adjustment to the rear pad, you gotta unlock this grub screw first, lock it up after you're done. That's gonna keep it from moving. Still good. All right, so now we're centered. Got our back pad right up against that rotor, and we're gonna adjust the cable. And for this, again, you just push it up to where it's in contact, maybe back it off just a touch, lock it down. All right, now, still not dragging, that's good. A squeeze. That feels nice and tight, but in this case, it might be a little too tight. We're gonna turn on the scooter and see if the brake light is coming on. And in this case, I would be totally skidding the tire right now, and the brake light is not coming on. So I have set this cable, it feels awesome, but I've set it too tight and it's not gonna activate the electronic front brake, and it's not gonna activate the brake light. So I have to give it a little more slack than this. I wish there was a way to adjust the switch up there, but there's not. So the only way to adjust this is to actually put a little more slack in the cable. I'm just letting this back a little bit and locking it down. And there we go. So now we've got the right amount of tension to stop the rear wheel and light up the brake light. And I'm gonna go ahead and lock down the last adjuster. And in fact, this is gonna let us, this still leaves us a little leeway to do fine adjustments if we want to. And once that's locked down, we're good. good to go. And that's it. That's your brake adjustment.